What's up, everybody? It's Robin, and today I'm back with a spooky little Halloween treat for you guys. We are going to be caking Mavis from Hotel Transylvania. So for today's cake, we're going to be using one extra thick 10-inch layer of delicious chocolate cake. Now, you guys can use whatever flavor you like, but this one's just for me and my family, and we love chocolate in our house, so we're going to be having some chocolate cake today. So you're going to want to start by leveling out your layer, and then we're going to torque that layer into two separate layers so we can add some delicious chocolate buttercream in between. But before I add that sinful layer of chocolatey goodness, I'm just going to take this very simple stencil that I made just with a piece of paper, and we're going to use it to cut out the shape that we need of Mavis's head. Now, you guys don't have to do it in that order. You can add your buttercream layer first, but I find when you go to stick the knife in, the buttercream can create a bit of a drag and can potentially tear the sides of your cake apart a little bit, so that it's something to be mindful of, especially if your cake is moist and crumbly, kind of like this one is. Now we're going to get this mess cleaned up and set these cake scraps to the side for some hungry little monsters who apparently can't wait for my cake to be finished. So now you guys can see I am taking a little bit of my chocolate buttercream and I'm smearing that onto a 10-inch cake board, and that's going to act as a bit of a glue for our first layer of cake to stick to. And now we are going to take some more of that delicious chocolate buttercream and we're going to fill our middle layer in between, if you haven't done that already, of course. And as we're using our offset spatula, we're going to take extra caution around the edges, being very careful not to tear our cake. Now, if you find that technique of spreading a little bit difficult, you can also put some in a piping bag and just apply it that way, and that'll give you a nice even layer as well. And now we're going to add that final layer of cake, and we are ready for some carving. Now, this next part is going to get pretty messy, and if your cake is really moist like this one, it's going to be really crumbly. So I highly recommend putting your cake in the fridge for at least a good 30 minutes before you start carving. That's going to give it enough time to firm up without drying out, and is going to make it so much easier for you to trim your cake without it crumbling to pieces on you. And another great tip to help combat that is to use a serrated knife. I like to use a smaller serrated knife so that way it's very easy to get into some of the smaller nooks and crannies. And if you use a very gentle sawing motion, you're only going to cut off just what you need. It is not going to crumble to pieces. All right, now that we've finished the hair and the shape of the face, we're going to clean this up and we are going to get started on her facial features. So as you guys can see, I drew up this fancy schmancy stencil, and we are using this and a small X-Acto knife to try and mark off where her eyes are supposed to go. Now, this didn't exactly work out the best for me. I couldn't really see where it was, so I took a different stencil and I cut the eyes and the mouth out so it was easier for me to actually cut it out without removing the paper, giving me almost perfect placement. And now once I finish cutting those out, I'm just going to pull the stencil away and we're just going to tidy it up a little bit and make sure everything looks as it should. And before we move on to the next step, I just wanted to stop for a second and say hello to anybody who might be new here. Welcome, thank you for watching, and I really hope you're enjoying the video so far. And I really hope you hit that subscribe button and leave us a comment and a like down below. And for anybody who is returning, welcome back and thank you for the support. I appreciate it so much as always. You guys are the best. And I bet you guys have some awesome Halloween costumes picked out for this year too. Now, I'm kind of in between Mavis and Morticia. I don't know, I absolutely love both characters, so you guys let me know what you think down below. And if you have any creepy costumes picked out for this year, I would love to hear about them too. Okay, so it's time to start our crumb coat. Now with a carved cake like this, it's really important to use a tool that you're very comfortable with. Now as you can see, for the bulk of this cake, I'm using a small offset spatula, as I find it gives me a really good control and I'm able to get into most of those nooks and crannies fairly easily. Now, I don't know about you guys, but the more of this I frost, the creepier it is. She looks like she crawled straight out of the Black Lagoon. That, or she's having a great spa day, because mud masks do make great facials. And Mavis does have some pretty amazing skin, but being immortal will probably do that for you. All right, so we pretty much got most of this crumb coat licked. We just have a few little spots there to finish up, and then we start to focus on smoothing because you want a nice finish before you cover your cake with fondant. And as you guys can see, I am switching over to a different tool here. This is a small piece of flexible plastic. Now, you can buy such a tool. It's also known as a flexi smoother, but here's a little money-saving advice. I went to the dollar store and I picked up some of those little flexible plastic cutting boards, and I use my X-Acto knife to cut whatever shape tool I need. And these work amazing. They get into all the nooks and crannies and made filling in those eyes and that mouth a breeze. Because this part can get quite time consuming, so anything that saves me time and money is definitely all right with me. So we're just finishing this up here and we are almost done. We're just cleaning up the edges and then we're going to add one last little detail before we start to cover our cake entirely with fondant. Because we did not carve a nose for her, because that's actually really hard to do, we're going to make one out of fondant and we're going to add that to the cake before we cover the face with fondant. So that way the little nose is going to show through. And to make it, we're just cutting out the rough shape. Then we're just going to soften any of those harsh edges with our fingers to make sure it's nice and tiny and cute. Then we're going to stick that into place and we're going to pop that cake into the fridge for just a little bit. So once my cake was fully chilled and I took it out of the fridge, I realized I wasn't super happy with the shape of her face. So I took a little bit of buttercream and I filled in her cheeks just a little tiny bit to make them a little rounder. And now we are covering her with some fondant. And as you guys can see, I'm using a very, very pale flesh tone for Mavis's face because, well, she's a vampire and she doesn't see the sun. So next I've just used my stencil and I've marked off the shape of her face, and now I am actually cutting it out ever so slightly bigger than what I actually need. Because of the shape of her face being a little bit rounded, we need a little bit of an overhang to fill in the sides. So we want to make sure we have enough fondant for that. And now that we have our face fully covered in fondant, we actually want to work fairly quickly here while our fondant is still nice and pliable. And we want to emboss those eyes and the nose and the mouth really well and make those features really prevalent. Now, this might not seem like a very important step, but trust me, the more time you spend doing this and the more features you accentuate, when you add all those finer details later on, your cake is just going to come to life. So trust me, make sure you spend that extra time on the little laugh lines and her dimples and her nose. The nose is so important, it can make or break the entire face. So spend the extra time on that as well. All right, so once you've finished shaping the face, we are going to move on to some of the other facial features. Now, at this point, you could go ahead and start with the hair if you preferred, but there is a portion of her bangs that need to sweep over her forehead, and I want to make sure to have all of her facial features in place first. I think it would be a lot easier that way. So for her eyes, I'm just using a rolled out piece of white fondant, and it's a little bit on the thick side because we did emboss those holes fairly deep, and I have used a stencil to cut out the shapes I need, and I'm just cutting them out using an X-Acto knife, and then we're sticking those into place and kind of pushing them in there to make them fit the way they're supposed to. Now that we have that white part of her eye tucked in nicely, we're going to move on to her iris. So we're going to be using a super light blue piece of fondant, which I've rolled out, and I've used my stencil to mark off the shapes that I need, and I'm cutting them out using a small X-Acto knife. Now I'm just going to take those little pieces and we are going to stick them into place, and I'm going to round them out and soften the edges using the tip of my finger and making sure they're stuck in place. And I'm just going to repeat that with the second eye and make sure they are lined up perfectly and they don't look cross-eyed. And then we are going to move on to painting the inside of her mouth. So for this part, you can actually use a couple of different techniques. You can paint it like I'm doing now, or you can actually just roll out a very small piece of the color fondant you want in the shape you need, and just kind of stick it in there like we did with the eyes. But I'm choosing to paint mine. I'm using a small, very small watercolored paintbrush and some concentrated gel food color. And we're just using a little bit of red with a little bit of brown over the top. And now that we have our mouth all covered in, we can go ahead and add some teeth. So I'm rolling out a piece of white fondant, and it's rolled out really thin. And I used a stencil to mark off the shape of the teeth, and we're just cutting it out using our X-Acto knife. Now that I have the entire shape of the teeth cut out, we're going to go ahead and make some smaller little cuts in between each of the individual teeth, so that way we can see them all in her smile. Now I'm going to take those teeth and we're just going to stick those into place, and we can move on to her lips. So as we all know, a part of Mavis's signature look is her black lipstick. So we're cutting out some tiny black lips from some very thinly rolled black fondant, and we're just sticking those into place, giving her that devilishly cute smile. But her eyes be looking a little creepy, so we're going to give her some pupils right quick. And since we already have our black fondant rolled out nice and thin, we're also going to give her some eyebrows. Now, I know these look a little bit funny. They're a little bit short, but it's not going to look too funny for long. We are going to give her some hair, and her bangs are going to cover that, so fear not. Now, once we get that second fussy little eyebrow into place, we are going to go ahead and give this girl some sassy little eyelashes. So we're going for max volume on these lashes. Maybe she's born with it, and maybe she's Maybelline kind of look, because if there's one thing I can relate to with her, it's a love for big black eyelashes. That is for sure. I love my mascara. And we want to make sure we get all the way around there with that black liner for that ultimate gothic look. Now she is really starting to come together, but my girl needs a wig or something. So we are going to start working on her black, luxurious, gothic meets rockabilly hairstyle. So here I am rolling out a nice big piece of black fondant, and first thing we're going to do is cut out the shape of her face, because we don't actually need that portion. We're just going to remove it, and then we're going to make a small slice at the very top where her hairline would be, and we're going to make that little split so it's easier to pick up each side and place it onto the cake individually. So we're just going to take that first piece and we are going to lay that into place, and we're going to cut off the excess at the top at the hairline and all around the edges once we've tucked that all into place. Then we're going to repeat that process on the opposite side and tuck it all in and trim the excess off that as well. And then we can start working on giving our hair a little bit of texture. So here I am taking my Dresden veining tool, and we're just creating some flippies at the bottom of her hair. And we're also going to create some vertical lines going down each side of her face. Now I am taking some of that very, very pale flesh tone fondant that we used for her face, and we're giving her two adorable little ears. And then we're going to cover up those ears with little strips of fondant hair on either side. And we're just going to use that veining tool once again to add a little bit more texture until I'm happy with how that looks. And now we are going to work on her bangs. So I've already marked off the pattern with my stencil, and now I'm using my X-Acto knife to cut out the bangs and create a little bit of fringe all along the edges. And now using our veining tool once again, we are going to create some more vertical lines, giving our hair a little bit more texture before we add it to the cake. And I don't know if you guys can notice, but I've also added the two little sprigs of hair at the very top of her head on the cake board. And you'll see that a little bit clearer once I pull the cake into view a little bit better. And now we're just sticking those bangs into place, and voila, doesn't she look awesome? I absolutely love it. It actually kind of reminds me of a haircut I used to have way back in the day. And now to finish her off, I really want to make that icy cold stare pop. So we're going to use a little bit of sky blue gel food color to finish off around the edge of her irises, and then just touch up a few little spots in her mouth there that I missed before. And voila, here she is, guys. Didn't she turn out super spooky and cute? I absolutely love her. Mavis is by far my favorite character on Hotel Transylvania, probably because I relate to her being a mom, but I think even more so because I absolutely love her style. I guess you could say I have a little bit of a gothic side too. Well, that's it for today, guys. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, you know what to do. Don't forget to hit the big thumbs up button and leave me lots of love in the comment section too. And if you haven't done so already, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and ring the bell so you receive a notification every time I post a new video. Thanks for watching, guys, and happy Halloween. Blah, blah, blah.